All right. I'm going to get this going.
So he's shooting for me.
Okay, everybody. We are Destination Downtown, and we're documenting the stories of these amazing people and many other people as this series will continue throughout the summer and beyond. Come on up. All right, so we're going to end the evening with Ethan Minsker, located to the Lower East Side from Washington, D.C., and he is an artist and a filmmaker, and he is one of the founders of the antagonist movement. So he's going to give us a little bit of his background story, and then we'll wrap up the evening with a little Q&A session. So welcome, Ethan.
Thank you. I'd also like to say, because this is like rare that I do these talks, I invited a few members of the press. So instead of just doing a straight thing, I might try to mix it up and ask if there's any questions from the press. Like, let's start with, are there any questions to start with? Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Minsker. I'm Jakob Teiles from Daily Goat. Wie ist Ihre Position zur Geist?
I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. Is there another question to start with here? Miss?
Denise Clare from National Digest. Do you think the fashion of the East Village and Lower East Side get better or worse?
I think the people who lived here, it's sort of like a time warp. You get stuck here, you live here, you wear the same stuff till you die. And then anyone who comes here new, sort of like, it doesn't really matter because that's all the gap. But one of the cool things about New York City and the East Village is that there was this sort of thing of like unique style of dress, not just in the punk rock realm, but artists wearing really bizarre stuff. Any other questions from the press?
So Ethan, Destination Downtown wants to know, why did you come to New York?
Okay, yeah, I grew up in Washington, D.C. I'm the son of two prominent lawyers. My mother was the president of the Women's Bar Association. My father was a lawyer for Richard Nixon. We're all Democrats. That's just how it is in D.C. You work for the Republicans because they have the money. And Republicans typically hire Democrats because they're honest. I'm dyslexic. I, had a hard time with a lot of the kids I grew up with in that same social class. I got into the punk rock scene. The punk rock scene in D.C. in the 80s was pretty violent. I had a number of friends who, succumbed to the violence, were murdered, and I was lucky enough to have parents that could afford to send me to New York to art school. But the concept of coming to New York, I'd known a couple of things, and one was like The Warriors, the movie The Warriors. So I was like, I'm going to have to join a gang, I'm going to be knife fighting with everybody. And then the other part is my family, we have relatives in Rhode Island, so we'd take the train from D.C. to Rhode Island. And in that passage, all you would see is the very worst parts of New York, like just rubble and burnt out buildings and all this stuff. And I was like, my God, New York City is a wasteland. But then when I first moved here, I realized, there was a lot of like really great stuff here. And I was lucky enough to have the parents that could afford to send me here. Is there another question from the press? You, sir.
Will the revolution be televised?
The revolution will be podcasted. Do you have a next question?
Yeah, I want to know, when you came to New York, where did you live? Where did you move to?
Going to school of visual arts, they really had 2 floors of dorms in the YMCA. The YMCA building used to be in the same location B&H Photo is right now. So my very first year, basically, that was a place where all the other floors was like if you were homeless and you could get like $34, you could find a place to stay for the night. I love it. There's birds and there's dogs. It's like wildlife here. So within my first year at the SVA dorm, they had actually a woman who was thrown off the roof and killed. There was a party in the ballroom where a ex-boyfriend of the bride came and shot the groom and bride. We had a student in the bathroom who was robbed at knife point for his camera. So that was kind of like my first year in New York at that dorm was kind of like, oh, this is how it's going to be. Everyone's going to be getting killed and robbed and all this horrible stuff. The second place I moved was 24th Street and Lexington Avenue. There was a nice little building there, and me and my roommates got this place. Across the street was a hotel called the Amsterdam Hotel, which right away should have been kind of like, this is a problem. It was like basically a big brothel. So during the time I lived there, I saw 2 gang guys stab a guy. I went to go see a concert at Columbia University, got out of the cab, and between that and getting up to the apartment, 3 people had been shot, 2 had died in that same hallway. Oh, there's a guy crawling up the street. There's a shotgun lying there, and there's a guy dead in the hallway. So, and then I moved down to Avenue B between 3rd and 4th Street, probably somewhere around 1992, above an illegal gambling joint that then turned into a restaurant. More questions from? Yes, sir.
What is your thoughts on the modern architecture of glass skyscrapers taking over downtown?
I think if you want to live in a bunch of buildings that are glass and skyscrapers, then you move to Midtown. You move anywhere else. But downtown should be 6-story buildings, walk-ups. The concept of building another glass hotel here is just killing this neighborhood. Overpacking it with people who can only afford those buildings. I don't like it. Next question.
Yes, a clunky of Clowning NYC magazine. I have a 5-part question for you today. 1, do you see gentrification as the effect of global economic changes based on the displacement of wealth? 2, as the 14th century cobbler Marcus Silaranen once said, a time and place can change everything. 3, is evolutionary game theory a useful modeling tool? And 5, how do you feel about stagflation in the labor force?
No.
After you moved to the East Village, what kind of impact did that have on you? How did that start affecting your life?
First, I'd like to say to the last lady, there are a lot of clowns in the media. I recognize that. I respect that. Growing up in D.C., getting in the punk rock scene, I was involved with a lot of like the Discord stuff going on and sort of like the harder punk stuff there. And they did have this community that really helped each other. Mostly it was in music, a little bit in film, and a little bit in art and fanzines. So I started making a fanzine in 1988. We have copies of this here for free. We always put it out for free. Moving to New York, the first thing I noticed, and I was kind of there like when Clayton was saying, you know, that when the rent started going up and all of that, is that the dynamic of living in New York is everybody moves here because they want to do something creative. If you don't want to move here because of that, you're moving here because you want to be around people who are doing something creative. Unfortunately, the rents make that very hard because you become a slave to your job. So you're stuck in this cycle of having to work to pay your rent, to work to pay your rent, and not doing what you're doing creatively. So I started working in the bars. I worked at 2A, probably around 95, and then I started working at Niagara Bar the day it opened in December 19th, 97. And, those dynamics of bars is they want people there and they want to make money and whatever. And the owners, Jesse Mallon and Johnny T, who are big fans of the art and really good about that stuff, had been pressuring us to make more stuff going on. So we said, hey, you got this room in the back of the bar. Why don't we do one-night art shows? We did that for 11 years. We showed over 3,000 artists. And the reason it worked is because you were giving people a chance without having to worry about the economics of a gallery. Without having to worry about paying the rent and having to pay a staff. And I can understand that, empathize with the galleries. I've worked as an art handler in them before. I understand that artwork that comes across the door of a Chelsea gallery has to be able to pay everybody's bills, including mine as an art handler. So the problem with that system, though, is that it doesn't leave a lot of room for creating unique art. It doesn't make a laboratory. So what we try to do with the antagonist art movement, and now our new group, Citizens for the Arts, is give spaces for artists where they don't have to worry about the economics of art, that allows them to experiment with what they're doing creatively, that allows birthing new movements, and we do consider what we do as a social art movement, not based on a style, but based on the connections of the people who work together. That's the thing, like in New York, that people seem to miss, is that it's beyond the cheap rents, beyond having a lot of creative people here. There was a huge room for experimentation. So you couldn't say that those same elements didn't exist in other cities. They did. There were other cities all over the world where there was cheap rent, but they didn't have as many art movements birthed out of them as New York City did, as punk rock, as hip hop, as the beatniks, as there's just on and on and on. So the thing about New York that's unique is that it brings everybody together, and those people who have diverse perspectives can come up with something unique. And so that's a lot of what New York did for me. Next.
Any good tips for good parenting?
You only have 2 functions as a parent in New York, and every parent here should learn it. As long as your kid does not join gangs and does not become a drug addict, you've done a great job. That's it. Next, sir.
Is punk dead?
Punk was never alive. Miss?
Would you say tattoos are still cool?
As long as someone's afraid to get them, they're cool.
Who were some of the most influential people you met on Avenue B when you first moved here?
You know, when I first moved to Avenue B, the cab drivers would not take my mom down there. They were like, "You're a little Irish woman. We're just not going to take you there. Like, you just can't go there." And it took her like 3 cabs to come see me, and then nothing happened. My very first week there, you know, I'd been in the punk rock scene. I've been photographing the CBGB's shows. I was covering all that stuff. I knew a lot of like the local gang kids that were much tougher than me. So the very first week I was there, I saw this kid walking out of Mona's bar and crossing the projects on 11th Street, and just kids from those projects throwing 40-ounce bottles at him and him running away. And me going like, oh my God, this guy's covered in tattoos. He's way tougher than me, local Puerto Rican kid. There's no chance I'm going to make it. 2 days later, I was walking out of my building, and another friend of mine that I'd known from the punk scene drove up in his car. And he's like, "Oh, you know, how you doing, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "I'm good, you know, but I'm a little nervous about the neighborhood. Like, you know, am I going to get murdered in my sleep here?" And he's like, no one's ever going to bother you here." And I go, "You know, why is that?" And go, "Well, on Avenue B in this time period, you're pretty much like the only white guy here. And I'm a parole officer, and I'm all of these guys' parole officer. So look at the corner." And like all the kids were watching us. And they're like, "Yeah, they think you're a cop now." And I was like, "Okay, great." After that meant not only did I never have a problem, none of those kids ever talked to me, ever. My local deli, which anyone in New York will tell you, is you got to have your local deli. You got to have the deli where take care of you, like, "Don't worry, you pay next time." Those guys wouldn't talk to me. No one would talk to me. I had to go 2 blocks up to Sonny and Ann's on Avenue B to get my food, and they all loved me, and they didn't think I was a cop. Any more questions?
In your book, Barstool Profits, you mentioned the Sex and the City effect. Could you talk about that?
Oh, right, my book, Barstool Profits. So I have 2 books. This one is about the DC punk scene, about you know, some of my friends getting murdered, but it's a comedy too. And Barstool Profits, which you know, and these books sell here regularly anyway. That's about the New York City bar scene and all that. Sex and the City, before that happened, you know, women would go out in their jeans. Like, it looked like New York in a rock and roll sort of sense. And then Sex and the City happened, and the bars are like, "We got to have red napkins, and we got to swirl them." And like, the bar I was working at, they're like, "We're going to put you in a suit and put you at the door." So they had this whole effect of dressing up and coming to the Lower East Side. That and the combination of ATMs is kind of these 2 marks that I see, is like people going out, dressing too much to come down to downtown. And then the installation of the first ATM on Avenue B in the credit union, where everybody said, like, all the kids in the neighborhood, the kids who liked me, not the kids on my block who all thought I was a cop, you know, like a line of people getting money, and then a line of people waiting to rob you. And that never happened. And then you saw these ATMs sort of popping up everywhere. And then I would be working at Niagara, and this woman comes in the door and goes like, you know, "Who's in charge of these ATMs?" And I'm like, "I don't know, the ATM police? Like, I have no clue. What's the problem?" She's like, "Well, there's receipts all over the floor, and it's a mess." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Things you should be worried about is like, have I been murdered today? I haven't. That's awesome. Who cares about an ATM?" That was like the beginning of the end for the neighborhood. I'd like to add also that the location we're in, this is a big part of the arts in the New York City. St. Mark's Books, for me personally, you know, I've been selling my films here, my fanzines here, my books here, without there being a problem. So this place still represents a true independent spirit, not just in the neighborhood, but of like publishing and all that in large. So you're sitting inside of like a part of that's important, you know what I mean? And I'm glad they're still in existence, and I'm very happy to be doing an event here, so.
What impact do you want to leave on New York and the Lower East Side?
You know, we've serviced over 3,000 artists in the 11 years we were doing the pop-up shows. We still currently do fanzines that highlight artists and writers. We have an art show coming up in Houston, Texas, and we have another show in Sydney, Australia that we're working on that service artists locally and around the world. So for me, it's not just a neighborhood thing. It's like we're trying to connect with artists from around the world and make a network that sort of represents that same sort of spirit and feeling of the Lower East Side. So you seem like these guys who've been asking questions here, they're all part of my same art group. And like Jakob here is actually from Berlin, and he's an artist that we met from doing this through the Berlin group.
Clowning NYC magazine would like to know how many clowns have you met in the time that you've lived in New York?
I work in Midtown, you know, so kind of every day I walk out the building, I'm ready for combat. This is a part of, like, you know, the outfit I'm wearing is actually like my event suit, so I have to show this part too.
Oh, very nice.
Because I feel art is combat, you have to be ready for war. Here you go, sorry, miss.
Cool, thank you.
You were saying before, like, the people that I met, and I didn't think I really answered that. You know, from doing the art shows, bring us, like, a lot of these older punk rock figures from the neighborhood, like people that I grew up, like, worshiping. So our major influence, like, within our group still today is a guy named Arturo Vega. This man, Arturo, passed away in 2013. He still has a large effect. Now, let me reference who Arturo is. Arturo is a larger figure in the punk rock world because he designed the Ramones logo that is kind of, you know, branded punk rock everywhere. And not just that, he also had a loft where they practice and would bring a lot of influence to the Ramones by bringing them different aspects of the art world and combining them and doing, you know, actual art projects with Dee Dee Ramone and all of those guys. So for us, Arturo wasn't just a member of the antagonist movement, he was one of our advisors. And he made so many different connections for us and got artists working together in different ways that still, even though he's passed away, you know, in 2013, still affect us now. So, yeah, I would say he was like our main, biggest, you know, advocate, I would guess.
In terms of younger artists and younger people that are coming into the city today, what do you mentor anyone? Do you have advice that you would give? What would you say to someone, to yourself, if you met yourself today and you were trying to come to New York City to be a part of an artistic movement?
Well, just to make it clear, like, you know, I representing the antagonist movement here today, but it's actually a bigger group. It's like a core of like 40 different guys. And one of the ways we kind of operate is that it's a social art movement. So we work with somebody, if we like your personality, and we want to be buddies with you, then we start working with you more. And then once you're in that, it's like then we provide work for each other. Like, I mean, Jakob can, you know, he was working today for my mom because she needed work, and you know. So we try to provide mentoring, we try to provide work opportunities, we try to provide, most importantly, creative opportunities, whether that's showing in a gallery or taking part in one of the films, or, you know, like being in the fanzine or something else. So we do a lot of mentoring, and it's a lot of different guys who do it on different levels. I mean, my big thing is what I kind of say to all of those younger guys is like, research. Like, don't come to me like, I got all this. It's like, no, go back and read about it and like learn about it and figure out how everyone else did it, and let's do it something, you know, a little bit different. But the big thing is, don't do it exactly the same way everyone else did it, because then you're like at the very back of the line and you got no chance at hell.
Do you think it's possible for a young artist to come here today and do what you did?
Yeah, it's called Brooklyn. Sorry. I live in Manhattan. I never go to Brooklyn.
What do you think the fundamental difference is between the East Village, Lower East Side and today's Brooklyn?
I mean, the problem is, again, it's like Brooklyn and the Lower East Side, it's like I've looked at apartments there and it's just too expensive anywhere. You know, I think people have to sort of separate in today's thing the concept of, you know, living somewhere for free and having that lifestyle in the 70s and 60s. It's just not going to exist anymore, you know. Even when I was living on Avenue B, I always had some guy living on my couch for free. You know what I mean? And those guys were all like in the hardcore bands, and like they're all successful artists now. You can't really do that now. I have a 4-year-old, so my couch is taken up with that. The concept of that is done. That's fine. Everything changes, so you have to sort of adapt to that. But New York City still has a lot of resources. I couldn't do these fanzines if I was in any other city. I couldn't make these films because, like, I have my friends here helping me right now. You know, I couldn't do these projects if I was anywhere else. And I've lived other places and I've tried. There's a lot of value still living here. You have to be willing to engage.
All right, thanks.
Don't forget to grab fanzines. I have them.
Don't go anywhere. Stay there.